Hey everybody, happy Wednesday. I think I was going to title this IGTV, what are my latest thoughts on Rachel Hollis, but I don't actually have a lot of thoughts on that, so I'm going to just move on to my subject matter. And I'm very unused to doing lives, just talking to camera, so bear with me as I sort of get my practice in with this. But I want to start talking a little bit about some of the things that I'm writing. And one of those things that has been really on my heart lately is why it's so important to be pushing or instilling faith values in your children now, even when they're very young, even 2 years old. And so I want to back up a little bit and tell you where this came from. So a few years ago, before I was a mom, I was listening to a podcast, and this woman was talking about how she was so anguished over the fact that her son no longer believed in God. He was like 16 or 17. And I sort of was bored by the podcast. I was like, oh, that's like, whatever, that's not a real problem. I'm sure he'll come back to God and all of these things. But now that I'm a mom, I can put myself in that position of thinking, what if my son or my daughter came to me, when they were 17 or 18 years old, and they said, I don't believe in God anymore, or I'm going to, become a different religion. Like, that would be really tough information. And as a parent, I've learned this so much more than anything else, that we have so little control over so much of what happens to our kids. But something that we do have control over, and something that I didn't realize we had as much control over as we do, is the direction of their faith lives. We have a dramatic impact on guiding them in that direction. And it's something worth thinking about more deeply and with a more of a plan in mind if you're going to be going that direction. So 3 reasons why it matters to be instilling those faith values in your kids now. Let's look at the numbers starting off. Number 1, so the National Association of Evangelicals has a poll that found that 63% of people become Christians before the age of 14. And then Barna research found that before the age of 14, parents are the next best guidance for, parents are the number one guidance for spiritual formation, but after parents, it's the church. And so childhood is truly a critical time for shaping people's faith. Leaving it to the whims of the world and hoping someone will figure it out later is not a great idea, simply just because most people really find those faith values and where they're going to stand for the rest of their lives in childhood. So we have to be thinking about those things now, and not just hoping that it's going to work out later. I think this goes to show that, there's a lot of times in our lives when we're not feeling faith, we're not feeling close to God, we're not going to church. I mean, think about it. We're in a pandemic right now. So many of us have been away from our faith practices. But even if we're not feeling it, I think it's important that we're prioritizing that part of our kids' lives, because ultimately, we want them to thrive in that area, even though we may not currently be thriving. So number 2, and I think this is something that I came up with just this week, and I started thinking about it a lot, and that's faith care. And I hadn't really ever heard it put that way. But when you think about what is faith care? Well, we care for our kids' nutrition. We care for their physical health. We want them to grow up to be moral people, respectful people, well-behaved. We want them to have character. But we also want to care for their faith, just like we are looking at what kind of nutrition they're eating, what kind of daycares and schools they're going to, what kinds of things they're reading and learning. We also need to be thinking deeply and intently about the kind of faith care that they're receiving. That's such an important part of our lives. You may hear a lot of people these days saying, I'm spiritual but not religious, or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, we are all spiritual beings, whether or not you consider yourself religious. Every single human being has a spirit, and we are all spiritual. And so if we are not tending and caring for that spirit in our children in the way that that we believe is best, then it's going to get tended and cared for by someone else and in some other way. So it's very important that we are shepherding our children in this way. And I have often in the past felt very sort of misguided or like I didn't have any direction. Like, how do I do this? Like, my kid's not even listening when I read them a Bible story. But I have been so enlightened lately and just found such a great community of women that are existing just to help guide moms that want to do this. Like, I have The Mama Bear Apologetics book, I cannot recommend that enough. And I'm currently reading Natasha Crane's book, 30 Conversations to Have with Your Kids About Jesus. And then I recently also got the Tiny Theologians cards. And those are just like all kinds of terminology and just beliefs and things that we want our kids to start understanding now. There's so much more I could get into on that, but I don't want this video to go on forever. But just keep that in mind, that term faith care. I think that's something that people are really not paying attention to, but it's something to be thinking about. And on that same note, it's like I hear people say sometimes, well, I don't want to force my kid into a religion, or I don't want to indoctrinate them. But something to consider if you're one of those people is that the kids are going to be indoctrinated with something. They're going to hear it at school. They're going to hear it from friends. They're going to hear it on TV. If you're not guiding them, if you're not molding them in that direction that you think is best, they're going to get it from somewhere else. And so why would we want to give that opportunity to somebody else when we have that opportunity ourselves to be sort of the key disciplers in their lives? That's another thing to think about, is just that discipling our kids is so important, and they should be our number one priority when we're thinking about how to disciple the next generation. We've got to be proactive. We cannot just leave it to Sunday school. We cannot just leave it to VeggieTales videos. We've got to be in there making the difference and really thinking critically about how we can guide them. So the third point I wanted to make was about mental health. Now this, to me, it is the least important of them all, but something that's really important. Last year, a writer, Ericka Andersen, wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal about how she actually has instructed parents of children, parents that are atheists, for example. She has actually instructed them to lie to their children about the existence of God, which, people might find that really weird at first glance, but I was totally intrigued by this piece. Now, this author, as far as I know, she is not in the business of faith. She's not writing about faith information. This is just sort of her professional opinion that when the studies show, and sorry, I'm reading off this paper, but studies show that the benefits for children to think that God exists, the benefits to their long-term mental health are very high. So, they're less anxious. And according to a Harvard study, religious involvement among children found that children who attended religious services at least once a week scored higher on psychological well-being measurements and had lower risks of mental illness. So, for some of you, that might be the secondary point. I know it is for me. I'm constantly writing about the benefits of faith community and faith for mental health. And the studies prove that over and over and over again, that those who have a strong faith in their life, specifically those who are attending church on a weekly basis, their rates of happiness and mental health are much higher. But I don't think that we can hang our hat on or do something just because we're like, oh, my mental health. It's got to be deeper than that. And when it comes to our kids, it is deeper than that, because our kids are truly the most important thing we will ever do. It's the most important legacy we will ever leave. And so I personally want to prepare my kids to face the world, to face the questions, to face the outside indoctrination that may come their way in the best way possible, and arm them with the facts and the scripture and the truth and the foundation of our faith in the best way I can. And so there's so much more I could say on this. I had to cut it short because I didn't want this to go for 45 minutes, but just sort of in conclusion, if there's a chance that we can affect our children's faith foundations for the rest of our lives, and there's a huge chance, like a 75% chance or more, that this is significant. And in turn, if you are a Christian, we're talking about eternity. We're talking about the rest of it all. And so I would just encourage you, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the just the process of teaching your kids, to not be overwhelmed and to just seek God's guidance and to seek out some of the resources I mentioned. Mama Bear Apologetics, I think they're about to come out with a new book, but they are a great one. Tiny Theologians is another one. And I know that there's a lot, even more resources out there for you, and I'm happy to be here as a resource as well as I'm looking into this stuff. There is a chapter in my book about this very subject. So I would love to dig into it more. I hope this was helpful to you today. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you next time.